rare to see so many people turn up for the first session of the day. But when it's Shantanu Moitra, there's no surprise. Uh, from the time I announced on the social network that this is happening, I'm under a lot of pressure to make him sing during the session. That's why the guitar's here. But it's also about the book that he's written with Arunadi on the wings of music. Now, the first thing one would imagine that if it's a Shantanu Moitra book and it's written on the wings of music, it must be only about the music. It's not. It's about the person, his experiences across the world, and how somehow that has made the musician that Shantanu Moitra is and the Shantanu Moitra we get to hear every day. So before we get into music, before we get into the book, if Arunadi can speak a little bit about the book. How did the book come about? What is the book about? Is it just his music? Is it his experiences?
Yeah. Hello?
It is on.
It's on? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You just said that the book is called On the Wings of Music, which I feel is a good title, and most of my readers have agreed with me. But then there is also a subtitle, A Book of Journeys. And there are a lot of journeys in this book, both physical and spiritual journeys. There are musical journeys, there are actual physical journeys, because Shantanu is an inveterate traveler. He's been, if you go through the book, you will see that he has traveled practically all over the globe. And he's gone up mountains by himself, he's tracked deserts, I don't know where all you haven't been, Shantanu. And like Rabindranath Thakur, who, traveled nearly all over the world, and in those days we know what travel was, and yet had time to write so much, and also 3,000 letters in addition. I think, Shantanu, you are going to beat Rabindranath one of these days, or at least come very close to him.
If only I had a ship to travel.
So the book is mainly about, the whole idea, of course, is to describe Shantanu's growth from a little boy who was not very interested in studies, at least from what I gather.
No,
I may be
right,
wrong.
Not at all. Yeah.
And for whom music was a passion. Like, he just knew that he was made for music, music was made for him. I think even before he properly, consciously understood anything, he just had to make music. And unfortunately, in our society, we have so many pressures. Parents have so many pressures. They have to see that their child survives in this very, very competitive world, that they get a good profession in which they can rise, they can climb, they can make money. Then they marry, then they have families, and then parents feel very happy. They feel, well, we've brought up our child, fine. But there are also those who don't walk the trodden path. And it's very, very difficult to recognize them. I must say that I myself feel guilty of many I've been a teacher also, although I've been teaching in a college. But there have been people, students, in whom the particular potential I have not recognized. Now, in this book, there are some people who recognize the potential and who helped him on. I think this book is basically about Shantanu and also about the people that you have met. Am I right, Shantanu?
True, absolutely.
People you have met, people who have recognized that spark of genius in you, and who have.
And it's also a collection of incredible stories. When you read the book, I'm sure you will read every chapter and you will think, did it really happen or did he make it up? Now, I'll tell you, I was absolutely honored that my first feature film had music by Shantanu. And a big part of the music making process was morning in the studios, evening at his house over great food and incredible stories. The stories ranged from, S.D. Burman to Gulzar Saab, to stories which, and a lot of stories about Vidhu Vinod Chopra. And those stories you hear and you wonder, could they have been true? And some later day you hear it from someone else and you're like, okay, those were true. And this book is filled with those stories. When I first got hold of this book, I thought those stories will feature here, but these are new stories, stories which are much more personal. And it's a story, a book of journeys. So I would request Shantanu to just very early on in the session, if you can sing a couple of lines which kind of sums up this book.
So this is the tragedy of my life, that I thought I've become an author, but I have not. I was clearly told that please come here with a guitar. We'll handle the book and the pens. What I think what happens is, this Gulzar keeps on telling me that where music ends, word starts, and sometimes where words ends, music starts. It's all a blur in our minds. কোথায় যে শুটটা শুনেছিলাম এই শুটটা, I was traveling somewhere in Arunachal. Na 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 re 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 re. It's quite incredible how once I still remember that day when I sang this line, and both Rajkumar Hirani and Vinod said that that's the search of Rancho, and Swanand, who was sitting in the room, wrote that line. बहती हवा सा था वो, उड़ती पतंग सा था वो, कहाँ गया उसे ढूंढो, हमको तो वो राह दिखाती, वो खुद अपनी राह बनाता, गिरता संभलता मस्ती में चलता था वो. गिरता संभलता मस्ती में चलता था वो. यार हमारा था वो, झुके हमारे दिल को, कहाँ गया उसे ढूंढो. And I punched this folk line that I heard probably somewhere in Arunachal, and it just gave that sense of search. And you remember this, the beginning chopper shot as it's going, as a small car is going and the credit rolls coming out. This for me was on the wings of music for me. Thank you.
That was quite something. Taking this forward, Aruna, do you want to read that chapter where his first brush with music, the Ravan Hatta at Jaisalmer station? Do you want to read a part of it? It's quite a fascinating incident. How much of it is, Shantanu, all this happened, and how much did you make it up?
No, I think it happened. Yeah.
Let's read the story first.
Okay.
Now, before I read the story, this is one of my favorite stories. You see, I just have to tell you that Shantanu and his family and I, we've been neighbors in Chitranjan Park, Delhi. And Shantanu is more or less my daughter's age. So we mothers would talk about our children, etc. And I also kept complaining that my daughter didn't attend to her studies, and so did his mother. And
Her daughter is an IFS.
so you know how destinies change. So that is the wonderful thing. Now here, in this first story, it really begins with Shantanu's infancy, if I may put it, and then how his strange passion, you know, a passion that went beyond all reason, all rationale. And I was so impressed with this story, it still makes me cry whenever I read it. I'll just read it out to you. I'm sure you'll feel the same emotions. Now, the story is called Jaisalmer Station, 3 a.m. When I was very young, we lived in Benares in a house facing the one in which Ustad Alauddin Khan lived. I've been told that as an infant, whenever I cried or was fretful, I was taken to Khan Sahib's house, where I would quieten down while listening to his music. It seems to me now that the melodies I heard then gradually entered my bloodstream and have, over the years, suffused my soul. My mother was a Lucknow girl and a trained Kathak dancer. My father's people hailed from the other side of the river, then known as East Bengal. When looking for a place to resettle after partition, they chose Benares because it was the holy of holies for Hindustani classical music, a city where all musicians congregated. A strong love of music ran through my father's side of the family. However, banks that look green from afar aren't always so when one comes close to them. My father's infatuation with Benares eventually faded. He relocated to a better place. He was looking for a better place for education and employment. And at first, so they moved to Delhi. At first, we were in Patel Nagar. Then, when I was in class 6, we moved to Chittaranjan Park. And it was here that I first discovered what being a Bengali was. Now, that is another part of Shantanu and of me, by the way, because we are both Probashi Bengalis who have found our Bengali roots. And now we revel in our Bengali roots. You know, we both find our creativity through Bengali. So, in that sense, we are, soulmates. I experienced the joy and bewilderment of living in a single language community. Everyone was Bengali, even shopkeepers and household helps, Durga Puja, Rabindra Sangeet, politics, Adda. I was part of it all. As a child, I studied in a kindergarten. The concept have just caught on. And this would be better, yeah. The concept had just caught on, and run by an Anglo-Indian lady and her daughter Jo. One year, at a school function, Jo brought her friend Shushmit Bose to play the guitar. It was the first time I had heard the instrument, and I was completely bowled over. We had joy, we had fun, we had seasons in the sun. Jo and Shushmit sang together, and I fell desperately in love with Western music. From that moment, there was no looking back. From the world of Hindustani classical music, which had cocooned me from birth, I fell into another. From Dylan to all the folk music of the world, I wanted to experience it all. The 1960s, when Dylan reigned supreme, was the decade of escape. And the 70s, when I was growing up, still bore much of the character of the preceding decade. Array, I thought to myself one day, all great men are rebels. They either run away from home or break social or community rules or do something their families disapprove of. I too must become a rebel. But how? The first step, obviously, was to run away from home. The decision didn't spring from any annoyance or disappointment with my family, nothing of the sort. It was just the done thing. Everyone was running away, I would too. One day I told my father that our school was organizing an excursion and that all my friends were going. With this unadulterated lie still ringing in my ears, I boarded the train to Jaisalmer. I chose Jaisalmer not because I wanted to see the Golden Fort, but because I wanted to hear the Ravan Hatta. I had heard this instrument only once at the Festival of India concert in Red Fort and been driven mad with longing to hear it again. There was only one idea in my head now. I must hear the Ravan Hatta. I must hear the Ravan Hatta. I'll find a way of doing so, no matter what the consequence. How I would hear it, to whom I would go, I hadn't a clue. The only thing I knew was that the instrument was to be found in Rajasthan. On a whim, I bought a ticket and boarded a train to Jaisalmer. But as it pulled away and the figures of my waving friends faded in the distance, I felt the first stab of fear. And this fear turned to acute panic when at 3 in the morning, I stepped onto the platform of Jaisalmer station. It was pitch dark, so dark that I couldn't see my own hand. Flailing my arms in the inky void, I managed to find a bench and sink down at one end. My heart beat rapidly. What had I done? What fool's errand had I embarked upon? The romance and glamour of roaming in the desert and crossing sand dunes with the strains of Ravan Hatta ringing in my ears vanished in the cold black reality into which I had been flung headlong. Precisely at this moment, a deep voice spoke from out of the dark. You've run away from home. You've come in search of the Ravan Hatta, haven't you?
This sounds more ominous in that language. "कहाँ से आए हो? घर से भाग के आओ क्या?" So this was it.
I felt myself turning to stone. Who? What? What was this? God or ghost? I could see nothing, hear nothing but the pounding of my heart. The disembodied voice spoke again. Just pass me the sack, beta. Maybe this also you could. Do you remember?
अरे छोड़ा देना.
Sack? What sack? I opened my mouth to ask, but my throat was frozen and no sound came. Groping in the dark, I did find a sack with something heavy in it, which I picked up and thrust in the direction of the voice. And now I heard some faint sounds. Jhum, 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 jhum. The sounds of metals hitting one another. But what they emerged from, I hadn't the slightest idea. There was no time for speculation either, for now a burst of melody, poignant, primeval, tugging at the heartstrings, rose in the air.